The Plaza Hotel, New York City. Sister's wedding. Emily Carter sat alone. Table number 12. The singles table. Humiliation calculated. Perfect. Teenage cousins. Widowed aunts. Everyone else? Happy couples. Emily? Completely alone. Blue-colored dress. Entire month's salary. Hair perfect. Makeup flawless. None of it mattered. Her sister Jessica deliberately placed her there. The family embarrassment. Emily was about to flee. Cry in bathroom. Then a man approached. Tall, tuxedo, dark hair. Intense eyes. 35 maybe. Nervous smile. He leaned in. Whispered, "Please, pretend you're with me, just for tonight. I'll explain later. My dignity is at stake." Emily looked at those desperate eyes, without knowing why. She nodded. She didn't know. This man was Michael Anderson. Single father, widower, fleeing obsessive ex-mother-in-law. And she certainly didn't know this fake relationship would become the truest love story of her entire life. Emily Carter was sitting alone at table number 12 at the Plaza Hotel in New York City, while 200 guests celebrated her sister Jessica's wedding. She wore a champagne-colored dress that had cost her an entire month's salary, her hair perfectly styled, makeup impeccable. But none of that mattered when all the other tables were filled with happy couples, and she was the only person completely alone in that glittering ballroom. Her sister had deliberately placed her at the singles table, a cruel mix of teenage cousins and widowed aunts. The humiliation was studied, calculated, perfect. Emily was about to stand up and flee to the bathroom to cry when a man in a tuxedo approached her table. Tall, dark hair, intense eyes, he was about 35 years old with a nervous smile. He leaned toward her and whispered those words that would change everything. "Please pretend you're with me. Just for tonight. I'll explain later, but my dignity is at stake." Emily looked at those desperate eyes and, without knowing why, nodded. She didn't yet know that this man was Michael Anderson, single father and brother-in-law of the groom, fleeing from his ex-mother-in-law obsessed with getting him back together with her daughter. And she certainly didn't know that this fake relationship would become the truest love story of her life. The Plaza Hotel in New York City gleamed like a jewel in the heart of Manhattan. It was late June, and the sunset painted the sky pink and gold as guests arrived for what everyone was calling the wedding of the year. Jessica Carter, 32 years old, successful influencer with 500,000 followers, was marrying Ryan Anderson, heir to a family of real estate developers. Emily Carter, 29 years old, elementary school teacher, had arrived alone as always. Her last relationship had ended 8 months ago, when her boyfriend had decided to travel through South America without her. When she found her name on the seating chart, her heart sank. Table 12, the infamous table of the discarded. She crossed the ballroom, passing elegant couples, and reached her seat. At the table were her 16-year-old cousin obsessed with her phone, her 70-year-old uncle already asleep, her widowed aunt who only talked about her late husband, and 2 empty chairs. Emily sat trying to maintain a dignified smile while feeling the pitying looks from other guests. She knew exactly what they were thinking. Poor Emily, always alone, not like her sister. It was the story of her life. Jessica, the beautiful one, the popular one, the successful one. Emily, the normal one, the forgettable one. Her mother shot her a look from across the room, a mixture of disapproval and embarrassment, before returning to chat beside the bride and groom. The first toast was particularly cruel. Jessica, resplendent in her $30,000 Vera Wang dress, laughed as their father told how the 2 sisters had always been so different. Everyone understood what that meant. Emily felt tears sting her eyes. She stood up abruptly and headed toward the bathrooms, but before she could reach the exit, someone stopped her. A tall man in a perfectly cut tuxedo with dark hair and hazel eyes full of urgency. He was about 35 years old with an expression that oscillated between panic and determination. He approached quickly, looking around, and whispered the request that would change everything. Emily looked at him bewildered. The man seemed to realize how absurd it was and explained quickly. There was a woman, his ex-mother-in-law, who had been pursuing him for a year, trying to get him back together with her daughter. If she saw him alone, she'd spend the entire night introducing him to single friends and reminding him how happy he was with her daughter. He needed her to think he was with someone, just for that night, Emily looked in the indicated direction and saw a woman about 60 years old, extremely elegant, scanning the room with hawk eyes. Then she looked back at the man. There was sincerity in his desperation, and frankly, she also needed an escape route. She nodded. The relief on the man's face was immediate. He smiled and offered his arm. As they walked together through the ballroom, Emily felt the looks change. It was no longer pity. It was curiosity, surprise. Who was this attractive man? She saw her mother straighten in her chair, eyes wide open. The man guided her toward the bar, away from the ex-mother-in-law, and introduced himself. Michael Anderson, brother of the groom Ryan, 35 years old, with a 7-year-old daughter named Sophie. He was a widower. His wife had died in a car accident 4 years ago. The ex-mother-in-law he spoke of was his wife's mother, who wouldn't accept that he wanted to move forward. Emily introduced herself in turn, feeling strangely comfortable. Perhaps because they were both fugitives, or perhaps because his eyes were kind. Michael ordered 2 glasses of champagne, and they toasted to their temporary agreement. For that night, they would be a couple. Tomorrow morning, they would return to being strangers. At least that was the plan. Playing the role of happy couple turned out to be surprisingly easy. Michael was natural, kind, attentive without being invasive. When they returned to the ballroom for dinner, he kept a hand on her waist, light but present. He explained to the organizers that he preferred to be with his date, and they seated them at a different table, full of couples their age, friends of Ryan's. For the first time that night, Emily didn't feel out of place. During dinner, Michael played his part perfectly. He poured wine in Emily's glass before his own. He occasionally leaned in to whisper ironic comments about the other guests that made her laugh. When the time came for dancing, he offered his hand with an almost shy smile. On the dance floor, with his arms around her waist and slow music filling the ballroom, Emily realized how long it had been since she felt this scene. It wasn't just pretense. There was something about Michael that calmed her. The way he looked at her, as if he were truly interested. The way he laughed at her jokes. They talked about everything. He told her about Sophie, a lively girl who loved dinosaurs and hated vegetables. He told her how difficult it was raising a daughter alone, balancing work and fatherhood, facing impossible questions. His voice broke when he spoke of his wife Sarah, and Emily squeezed his hand in a spontaneous gesture of comfort. Emily, in turn, told things she had never told anyone, about how she always felt in the background compared to Jessica, about how her mother clearly preferred her older daughter, about how her ex had made her feel boring. Michael listened attentively, and when she finished, he said something that impacted her profoundly. "Anyone who found you boring was an idiot. You're the most interesting person I've met tonight." But the peace didn't last long. Halfway through the night, the famous ex-mother-in-law appeared. Patricia Henderson was an imposing woman with perfectly coiffed hair, jewelry probably worth what a car cost, and a smile that never reached her eyes. She approached, completely ignoring Emily, and fixing her gaze on Michael with possessive intensity. Michael responded politely but coldly, keeping a protective arm around Emily's shoulders. Patricia finally deigned to give Emily a look that scanned her with barely veiled disdain. Emily recognized that judgment. It was the same one her mother gave her when comparing her to Jessica. Something in Emily activated. Maybe it was the champagne, maybe the exhaustion of being treated as inferior. Suddenly, instead of shrinking, she leaned against Michael and smiled sweetly at Patricia, showing a confidence she didn't know she possessed. Patricia's reaction was immediate. Her eyes narrowed, her jaw tensed, but she couldn't say anything without seeming rude. With a final venomous look, she excused herself and walked away, heels hammering the marble floor. Michael looked at Emily with surprise and admiration. Then he burst into laughter, genuine, liberating laughter. He pulled her closer and whispered that she was incredible, that Patricia had never been put in her place so elegantly. Emily laughed too, suddenly feeling powerful. For the first time in years, she felt equal. But as the party continued, as they danced and laughed, something was changing. The looks lasted too long. The touches seemed too natural. When Michael brushed a strand of hair from her face, his fingers lingered on her cheek. The fiction was becoming dangerously real. The party continued until late hours. At midnight, while older guests were leaving, Emily and Michael found themselves on the terrace overlooking Fifth Avenue. The moon reflected in building windows, creating a silver glow. They stood in silence, side by side, looking at the panorama. The agreement was that they would pretend only during the wedding. In an hour it would end. They would return to being strangers. However, neither seemed in a hurry. Michael spoke first. He told how after his wife's death he had closed himself off. He had lived on autopilot for years. Work, Sophie, sleep, repeat. He hadn't allowed anyone to get close. He had built walls so high no one could climb them. Then he looked at Emily and said something that made her heart beat faster. "Tonight is the first time in 4 years I've felt alive. And it's not because of the pretending. It's because of you." Emily felt something tighten in her chest. She should say something light, maintain distance. Instead, she confessed too, the words coming out before she could stop them, about how she always felt invisible, about how that night he had made her feel seen for the first time, about how talking to him was easier than with people she'd known for years. They looked at each other. The silence was charged with something neither dared name. Then Michael approached slowly, giving her time to move away. Emily didn't move. When their lips touched, it was as if something inside her awakened. The kiss was sweet, uncertain at first, then deeper. When they separated, both were breathing heavily. Michael rested his forehead against hers and whispered that this wasn't part of the agreement. Emily laughed, nervous, happy, scared. But the moment was interrupted by Jessica's shrill voice. The bride was on the terrace, surrounded by bridesmaids, all drunk and noisy. When she saw Emily and Michael together, her face went from surprise to annoyance. She approached, wobbling in her heels, eyes bright with something more acidic than champagne. Jealousy, perhaps, or spite. She made a venomous comment about how interesting it was to see Emily with someone. Given that she normally preferred to be alone, Emily felt the old insecurity return. Jessica had that power, making her feel small with few words. But then she felt Michael's hand squeeze hers. Before she could respond, Michael intervened. His voice was calm but firm, protective. He said that Emily was extraordinary, and that perhaps Jessica was too busy with herself to realize it. Jessica looked at him, visibly disconcerted. She wasn't used to being questioned. She stammered something about just joking, but her bridesmaids dragged her away. Emily was moved. No one had ever defended her against Jessica. She looked at Michael with moist eyes and whispered a thank you that didn't seem sufficient. But the magic of the night had been interrupted. Reality was infiltrating. They were still two strangers who had met a few hours ago. A kiss didn't change the fact that tomorrow they would return to separate lives. When the party finally ended, shortly after 1 o'clock, Michael walked her to her room. Are you enjoying this story? Leave a like and subscribe to the channel. Now let's continue with the video. They stopped in front of the door, suddenly shy. Both knew it was time to separate, to say thank you and close that chapter. Instead, Michael asked if he could see her again. Not as a fake girlfriend, as Emily. The woman who had made him laugh more than he had laughed in 4 years. Emily's heart leaped. She wanted to say yes with an intensity that hurt. But fear infiltrated. What did she know about him? He was a single father with emotional baggage. She couldn't even impress her own family. How could it work? But looking at those sincere eyes, that vulnerable hope, Emily did something brave. She nodded. They exchanged numbers. Michael kissed her cheek sweetly and walked away. Emily entered her room and leaned against the closed door, heart beating frantically. What should have been the most humiliating night had transformed into something unexpected. Emily woke up with a mixture of euphoria and anxiety. She checked her phone and found a message from Michael that arrived at 7 in the morning. He was inviting her to breakfast with him and Sophie at 10 at the hotel bar. No pressure, but he'd like to see her again and thought Sophie would like her. He was inviting her to meet his daughter on day 1. She was about to enter the most important part of his life. It was too fast, crazy. But as she dressed, Emily realized she wanted to go. She went down to the bar at 10:05, nervous as never before. She saw them immediately. Michael sitting at a small table on the terrace, and next to him, a girl with long brown hair and pigtails eating pancakes while animatedly telling him something. When Michael saw her, his face lit up. He introduced her to Sophie as Daddy's friend. Sophie scrutinized her with those big, direct eyes children have. Then she asked if she taught about dinosaurs. Emily laughed, conquered. An animated conversation started about dinosaurs, about Jurassic Park, about how Sophie wanted to be a paleontologist. Michael watched them both with an expression of tenderness and hope. They had breakfast together. Sophie chattered nonstop. Michael moderated the girls' enthusiasm, and Emily laughed more than she had laughed in months. It was so easy, so natural. But then reality broke through. Jessica and Ryan were checking out, surrounded by luggage and relatives. When Jessica saw Emily with Michael and a child, her face contracted. She approached, always perfect, and made a seemingly innocent comment, but loaded with double meaning. I didn't know Emily liked children. I thought she preferred her freedom. It was the usual poison in disguise. Before Emily could respond, Sophie intervened with a child's frankness. Why do you talk like that? Emily is nice. I like her. Jessica was visibly disconcerted, stammered something, and quickly walked away with Ryan. Michael looked at Emily with concern, asking if she was okay. Emily nodded, but inside she felt troubled. Not because of Jessica, those words already slid off, but because of the doubt they had planted. Was she ready for this? For a relationship with a man who had a daughter who needed stability, not temporary experiences? As if reading her thoughts, Michael said gently that there was no pressure. He knew it was complicated and fast, but he really liked her. And if she wanted to see where this led, he was there, at her pace. Emily looked at him. This man she barely knew but who already seemed to know forever. She looked at Sophie finishing her pancakes. And she made a decision. She liked him too. It was complicated and maybe crazy, but she wanted to try. Michael's smile was worth every uncertainty. The following months were different from anything Emily had experienced. Michael lived in Manhattan, only half an hour from her. They saw each other 2 or 3 times a week, always with Sophie. At first they went to the park, to the Natural History Museum where Sophie admired dinosaur skeletons, to get ice cream in Central Park. Emily discovered that dating a single father was completely different. There were no spontaneous romantic dinners or improvised weekends. Everything had to be planned around Sophie's schedule: school, homework, babysitter. But strangely, instead of finding it limiting, she found it comforting, real. Sophie welcomed her into their lives with a child's openness. She called her Miss Emily and insisted she help with homework even when she didn't need it. One night, while coloring a T-Rex, Sophie said casually that she wished she would become Daddy's girlfriend. That way they could be together more often. Emily was speechless. She looked at Michael, who was cooking, and he gave her a look that clearly said, "Kids always say what they think." But the truth was that Emily wanted it too. It had become clear that what had started as fiction had become real. Michael was kind, attentive, funny. He made her feel seen, and above all, he respected her. One night, after Sophie went to bed, they were sitting on the couch watching a movie. Neither was really paying attention. There was tension in the air, not unpleasant, but charged with the unspoken. Michael paused the movie and turned to her. He wanted their relationship to be official, not just for Sophie, but for him. She had become an important part of their lives. He wanted the world to know she was his. Emily felt tears sting her eyes. She wanted it too. They kissed, sweet and deep. And when they separated, Michael warned that there was something she should be aware of. Patricia wouldn't take it well. She remained convinced he should stay faithful to Sarah's memory. Emily stopped him with a kiss. They would face everything together, but facing Patricia proved more difficult than imagined. When the woman discovered they were really together, she unleashed a campaign of manipulation. Worried calls suggesting he was replacing Sophie's mother too quickly. Messages to Emily, seemingly kind but threatening, saying that some women weren't made to be stepmothers, and that Sophie needed stability. Emily began to doubt. What if she was right? What if she was hurting Sophie? One night she broke down. She told Michael that maybe they should slow down, that she wasn't ready. Michael looked at her with hurt but understanding eyes. He explained that Patricia was doing exactly what she wanted, putting doubts in her head, but Emily wasn't an experiment. She was the woman he had fallen in love with, the one who made Sophie laugh, the one who had transformed their house into a warmer place. Emily whispered, asking if he had really fallen in love. Michael nodded, vulnerable and sincere. Yes, he was in love. He knew it was fast and terrifying, but it was true. Emily felt something melt inside. All the insecurities, the doubts, the voices saying she wasn't enough vanished for a moment. She was in love too. They hugged tightly, and in that moment she understood it was worth fighting for him, for Sophie, for herself. 6 months after Jessica's wedding, Emily found herself again in an elegant situation, but completely different. Michael had invited her to Sophie's birthday party. She was turning 8. It wasn't just balloons and cake. It was a bigger event with family and friends, including Patricia. Emily was nervous. It would be the first time she'd face the extended family as the official girlfriend. But when she arrived, Michael and Sophie received her with such warmth that the nerves calmed. Sophie wore a little purple dress and insisted Emily sit next to her. Michael's relatives were kind and welcoming. Some looked at her with curiosity but without judgment. Then Patricia arrived. She entered with an enormous gift and barely masked disapproval when she saw Emily. But before she could say anything, Sophie dragged her off to show her the presents. Later, Emily found herself face to face with Patricia in the kitchen. The woman looked at her with cold eyes and said she hoped she understood the responsibility she was assuming. Sophie didn't need another loss. Emily felt the old insecurity return. But then she thought of everything she had learned. She thought of Michael, who loved her. She thought of Sophie, who called her my Emily. And she found courage. She responded that she was right. Sophie didn't need another loss. That's why she had no intention of going anywhere. She loved her father and that girl. She wasn't trying to replace her daughter, just be part of their lives. And if Patricia couldn't accept it, she was sorry, but it wouldn't change anything. Patricia stared at her, disconcerted. No one had spoken to her so directly. For a long moment she seemed about to explode. But then she softened, just a little. Perhaps she understood that fighting was useless. Or she saw the sincerity in Emily's eyes. She said that Sarah was special, and she missed her every day. Emily responded sweetly that she understood how difficult it was to see Michael move forward. But he deserved to be happy, and Sophie deserved to grow up in a home full of love, not regrets. Patricia didn't respond, but nodded slightly before leaving. It wasn't complete acceptance, but it was a beginning. That night, after the guests left, and Sophie fell asleep exhausted on the couch, Michael and Emily sat on the balcony. The city glittered below them, and Michael took Emily's hand, thanking her for being there, for loving Sophie, for loving him, for not running away when it got difficult. Emily rested her head on his shoulder. She was the one who should thank him. He had made her feel special when she thought she was invisible. He had given her a family when she felt alone. Michael kissed her sweetly. That night at the wedding, when he asked her to pretend to be with him, he never would have imagined she would become the truest thing in his life. Emily laughed. Neither had she, but she was happy he had asked her. They looked at the stars in silence, hand in hand. Sophie slept inside, surrounded by gifts. Patricia might never be completely okay with it, but she was learning to accept. Jessica was still Jessica, egocentric and critical, but Emily had stopped seeking her approval. She had found something more valuable, a family that had chosen her, not out of obligation or blood, but out of love. And as Michael whispered plans for the future, summer vacations, maybe moving in together, maybe someday something more permanent, Emily realized that that humiliating night at the wedding had been the best thing that ever happened to her, because it had brought her here, to this balcony, with this man, with this life she now couldn't imagine losing. Sometimes, the best love stories begin with a lie, and sometimes, those lies become the most beautiful truths. Like if you believe sometimes the most embarrassing situations bring the best opportunities. Comment if you've ever pretended something that later became real. Share this story of fake relationship turned true love. Subscribe for more stories that prove love arrives when you least expect it. Sometimes it takes a desperate stranger and an absurd agreement to realize you deserve much more than you always believed. And sometimes the perfect family isn't the one you're born into, but the one you build with brave choices and open hearts.